Here we go. So, Professor Russell James, you have the floor in chatting with us today.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll be taking a look at some of these slides. Now, as I mentioned in the chat, I do share all of my stuff for free, and I just stick that on encouragegenerosity.com. So that Encourage Generosity has links to all of my slide decks, including this one, all the books I've written, videos, various other things. Like academic journal articles that nobody actually wants to read, but hey, they are there as well. So this is a really good sized group today. And so I do want to mention that as we're going through, feel free if you have thoughts, comments, questions, put those into the chat. We'll also have time at the end for anything else that you'd like to hear about. Obviously, comments or questions as well. But I'm just encouraging you to please do jump in because with this, this is a really great size of group to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and start talking a bit about some of these ideas on how to have wealth conversations, and we will look at the science side because I'm a researcher, but also I'm going to get very practical in terms of the sentences. What works? What exactly do you say? Now, we're going to start with a bit of the numbers and psychology first, so a bit of the science, if you will. And I like to put it this way, the secret to major gifts is to understand that these are gifts of wealth, not disposable income. Now, this is a big difference because for most people, they will only think of their charitable giving as something that comes from disposable income. But wealth is different. Wealth is not income. It doesn't come from a paycheck. Instead, wealth typically comes from owning assets that go up in value. So the idea is we either pick the right assets or we use personal effort to increase the asset value. Now, this is actually the story of wealth and wealth accumulation for Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, or even your neighbor. What do I mean by that? Well, you take Bill Gates, he started a company, then he used personal effort to increase the value of those shares that owning that company. Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, he invented a new way to borrow money to buy shares, and then he bought the right stocks. And then if you think of most middle class wealth, it actually comes from borrowing money. We call it a mortgage to buy an asset, and we call it a house, and that tends to go up in value over time, and that's where the bulk of middle class wealth is held. So I am a professor. That means I love giving exam questions. Unfortunately, Lauren said that I'm not allowed to fail anybody today, but I can at least give you an exam question. So just as proof of life, feel free and type into the chat what your guess would be on this, according to census data. What percentage of financial assets are held in cash, checking accounts, money market accounts, and similar? So let's see if we have any brave souls that want to type into the chat the A, B, C, D, or E. We're just looking at thanks, Tara, for the B there. Got some brave people. Heather agrees with the B. We've got a C, a B, also a D in there. 15%, which is a C, and another C. So yeah, so thanks for participating in that. And I think that's generally where people would think the numbers are. Here's actually what the numbers are. That depending on how we define it, between 1 to 3% of financial assets held by families are held in what we would call cash, that is checking accounts, saving accounts, money market deposit accounts, and similar. Everything else is held in other non-cash assets. So stocks, bonds, retirement accounts, life insurance, mutual funds. So yes, correct. A is the answer on that quiz question. Now, this is actually important when it comes to charity. It's important because of the psychological impact. Gift size is relative to the money category. When we ask for cash, the natural reference point is, well, other things we spend cash on, what I just spent at Starbucks. When we ask for appreciated assets, That's a bit different because we're asking from the large bucket. If I ask for a gift of shares of stock, my natural reference point is my stock portfolio. That's going to be a lot larger than my regular checking account. Large gifts are made possible by these large reference points. And so, a fun experiment showing the impact of this. People were walking into a grocery store. If they wanted to participate in the experiment, they were randomly assigned to either being asked questions like, what's in your wallet or purse? Do you have any cash? Do you have any credit cards? Or asked, do you own stocks? Do you own bonds or certificates of deposit? Well, the people that were asked about their assets on their subsequent shopping trip, on average, spent 36% more. So just being reminded of our wealth as wealth holders immediately changed behavior. Now, we're more interested in the charitable behavior, but we do see that similar effect. A small ask from a small category can work. That's the pennies a day argument, right? But a big ask from a small category doesn't work as well. A big ask from a big category is what tends to work better. In one experiment, they tested for the different ways of framing whether you should call the cost of a gift, say, $1, $4, $7 a day, or if you should describe it as, well, this is going to be 350, 1,400, or $2,500 a year. And it turns out that for the smallest ask, the daily amount worked better. Again, the pennies a day argument worked, but for anything over $1,000, the results reversed. And so that small ask stream did not work as well. We also see in experiments that a small reference point tends to make future gifts small. So this was an unusual experiment where people first had a gift made on their behalf. Now, that was made either as one single lump sum or it was broken into small daily amounts. Now, later, people had the opportunity to make their own gift to the cause. People with prior gifting that had been broken into the small amounts, on average, they gave a third less. Now, it was interesting in this experiment because the reason that the previous gifting being broken into small amounts affected their future giving was because that reference point felt smaller. And experimentally, if before you asked for the gift, you actually showed the total of all of those small segments of giving, the total of all prior gifts, that actually increased the donations by right at 50%. So again, we make that reference point larger, people give more. We make the reference point smaller, they give less. There's another experiment that found a similar result. When people's prior gifts, now this is gifts they had actually made, were described in monthly terms, this is on average how much you've given per month, they tended to give less. However, if they were described in total terms, people then tended to give more. The idea being that that's a much larger reference point, and it's showing that I'm the kind of person that makes those kinds of gifts. So you can think of it this way. Suppose we frame this in the wrong way. We might say, over the last 3 years, you've given an average of $50 per month. Thank you so much for that. Would you consider taking a leadership role in funding this new project with a gift of $1,000? Notice the mismatch. A person thinks to themselves, no, I'm not $1,000 donor, I'm the $50 donor. However, think of how it changes the conversation if you begin with, over the last 3 years, you've given $1,800. Thank you so much for that. Would you consider taking a leadership role in funding this new project with a gift of $1,000? Well, notice how that changes the framing. We're using the larger reference point, and it makes it appear that, well, I am the kind of person who makes these kinds of larger gifts over time. So again, the prior giving story connects to future giving. Describing past giving as several small gifts, that's one story. Describing it as a single large total is a different point. Now, the psychological concept here is that we're changing the reference point. And when we change the reference point, that changes the giving. Here's another experiment. This was where six different mailings went out to 50,000 people, and these were for two regular donors for a annual campaign, and they were testing six different headlines. The most powerful headline was this one. campaign donor for blank years. Your most generous gift was blank dollars. Thank you. So notice some things that this does. Number one, it emphasizes the length of the relationship, that they have been with the organization a long time. And then it sets the reference point for the highest gift they've ever given in the past. That kind of creates that natural desire to exceed that last point. Now let's get back to gifts of assets and understand with this psychology of the reference point, which gift is more valuable, a $10,000 check or $10,000 of stock shares. Now, if you ask your CFO, they might say, oh, stock shares, that's a hassle. Let's just take the cash. But there's a couple of reasons why that's actually not the right answer. Now, first is that the gift of stock shares is cheaper for the donor. They not only get a tax deduction, but they also avoid paying the capital gains taxes on those assets. And the other reason is that it's actually much more powerful for the nonprofit because now you have gotten that donor to engage in wealth sharing, that is asset sharing. And that psychological transformation can be very powerful for the donor's future giving. Appreciated assets is where the wealth lives. So this relates to a behavioral economics concept called mental accounting. Now, on a spreadsheet, a dollar is a dollar, but in story, people put labels on that and they treat the dollars differently based upon those labels. So whenever we can make a new category of money become donation relevant, it increases giving. And we see this experimentally. You sort of think of it this way. After the first time that maybe you were moving or redecorated and you had some extra household items, and so you gave those to a charity shop, notice when that situation comes up the next time, what comes to mind? The charitable option comes to mind. In the same way, the first time a donor makes a gift of stocks and they realize, oh, I didn't have to pay any of those capital gains taxes because I gave it instead of sold it. Well, the next time they're facing a realization event where, oh, I'm going to be facing a big capital gains tax bill, they can think of that charitable option as well because they have been trained in that. Now, I've been giving you a little bit of psychology and kind of the concept behind it, but let me get real world with some studies we did on using over 1 million nonprofit tax returns. And what we found was that when we were trying to predict long-term contributions growth, raising money from non-cash assets was actually very powerful. So, for example, if we are comparing organizations raising at least $1 million a year, and we look at those over a 5-year period who both started and ended raising their gifts only from cash, on average, those cash-only organizations grew their total contributions 11% over that 5-year period, same as the inflation rate over that period of time. But notice organizations that both at the beginning and at the end were also including gifts of securities in their fundraising, their average growth rate was 66%. That is a six-fold greater rate of contributions growth. Now, that's really powerful because we're talking about the 990s from all nonprofits that e-filed their 990s in the country. In fact, even if the organization, if we just knew that they started out receiving gifts of cash and securities, just that one piece of information said they're on average going to grow their contributions twice as fast as those who started out just receiving gifts of cash. Now, if they kept doing that for 5 years, it became a six-fold greater increase. So very powerful. So we want to dive into how do we start these conversations, listening for an upcoming sale or retirement inheritance, all great times for charitable planning. We can be a resource. Say, I help our donors give smarter. How is that? Share a story about a donor who made a gift of an asset and how that was more powerful because of the tax efficiency of that. These stories can include stocks, bonds, real estate, businesses, any kind of asset. Again, once a donor begins to think of wealth sharing donations, things change. So let me talk about one form of wealth sharing, not disposable income sharing, which is estate gifts. Now, no reason you should know the answer to this one. I just do this as a proof of life. If anyone is brave enough after that last quiz question to put in the answer they like for this next one, do wealthier donors tend to make a larger share of their charitable gifts as estate gifts rather than lifetime gifts? So if you think they give less that way, put in A. If you think it's about the same, put in B. If you think they give twice as much that way, put in C. 10 times as much that way, D. Or 50 times as much that way, you can put in E. So let's see what folks are guessing here. We've got some C's. We've got some B's and D's. A C. Carrie says a C. Tara says a B. Becky with the E. And so, yeah, thanks for participating in that. And it turns out that you were probably right. Just depends upon how you define wealthy. So here's what we see. As wealth increases, the size of the estate gift relative to annual giving goes up and up and up. So if for you wealthy means $2 to $5 million, well, that's going to be 20 times annual giving. If that wealthy to you means over $50 million, it's going to be 50 times annual giving. If it's over $100 million, that's over 100 times annual giving. So we know that because of this, estate gifts from the wealthy can be enormous. They can be transformational for the organization. But what you might not realize is that legacy gifts can be transformational for the donor. You see, most people will go through their entire lives only considering charitable giving as a disposable income decision. And the first time that most people commit to a gift from their wealth is when they do that in their estate plan. And it actually changes their current giving behavior fairly dramatically when they make that. So what you're looking at here is results from a nationally representative study of adults over age 50. And we're looking at the same people on the left-hand side in the white bars and the right-hand side in the black bars. The only thing that changed is that in the middle, they added charity into their estate plan. Notice their current giving goes up about 77%. And that's not just a temporary bump, that's sustained 2 years, 4 years, six, even 8 years later. It's a permanent transformation. So there is this idea that what happens is that the donor's psychology changes. Here's another example of the power of this. So this was from a recent analysis of a large humanitarian charity, and this was from a donor survey. A little over 18,000 supporters responded. About 80% of people said they were unlikely to make a gift in a will. When asked if they also had made a gift of assets, stocks, real estate, retirement, bank account, or life insurance, only 0.4% had. But about 2% of the donors had already included a gift in their will to the organization. Notice when they were asked that same question about gifts of assets, they had a 50 times greater likelihood of having engaged in asset giving. In the same way, even those who hadn't engaged in giving were about 7 times more likely to say they would consider doing so. So once again, that idea is once we get into the asset sharing, it can really change things. Now we're going to switch from the statistics to a little bit of story. I like to talk about if you are interested in major life investment gifts, we want to advance the donor's hero's journey. Now, that's the right story, but for major gifts, we need something else. We also need the right setting. In story, setting matters. It creates expectations and defines behaviors. If we're in the fantasy realm, then we're open to fantasy events. If we're in the Old West, then we expect Old West things. Well, for major gift, the question is, are we in a setting of wealth sharing? Big gifts are asset gifts. A recent study by Case showed that 60% of large gifts, what we call principal gifts, to colleges and universities, and these are at every level, so from community colleges to major research universities, whatever they consider to be a relatively larger principal gift, 60% of those gifts did not contain even a single dollar of cash. This is what big gifts look like. So we want to establish the setting by getting donors to talk about their wealth, their business, or investments. It can be very powerful. Now, in this story, by the way, the fundraiser also has an archetypal character. This is known as the guiding sage, maybe Obi-Wan or Morpheus in the Matrix, Gandalf the Grey in The Hobbit. This is the character who helps the prospective hero complete that journey, giving advice, planning, and guidance, introducing the hero to friends and allies, and providing that magical instrument or weapon that helps the hero to have their impact on the larger world. Well, that's what we often do as fundraisers. We give advice, planning, and guidance. We can introduce the prospective hero to friends and allies, maybe technical experts, past donors, and we can provide those magical instruments of impact like gift instruments or agreements. We can fulfill this role oftentimes by asking questions through appreciative inquiry and specifically by asking about assets. Now, I know what some of you may be feeling at this point that, well, okay, this all sounds good on paper, but I don't really want to feel comfortable doing this. These conversations require talking about wealth. Well, first, let me point out that people who are wealth accumulators, the management of that wealth is actually a big part of their lives. It's something that they're concerned about. Building and managing it is something that is of interest to them. So you can think of the goal as social. But also, something I think is even more important is to understand what is your goal in having this conversation. The reason that most fundraisers fear financial conversations like this is because they have the wrong goal in mind. They think the idea is, oh, well, if I'm going to start a conversation about assets, that means I need to be able to pass a CPA tax exam on the fly if some hyper technical question comes up. No, the goal is to get permission to share valuable options at the next meeting. And in fact, if we get that hyper-technical question, we love that to happen because that is a great justification for having that next meeting at which we can share those valuable options. So ultimately, in the conversation, we want to get to something like this. You remind me of another donor. He was in a similar situation. I remember he used some creative planning. It avoided taxes and helped him make a big impact. Would you mind if I put together some ideas for you to look at? So notice we're introducing this, that people like the donor have done things like this before. We use value words. We're asking for permission to share even more value. Other ways we can do this. Some fundraisers suggest this. You mentioned that you're going to be pass the business to your kids. Do you know that there are some ways you can do that that will actually save you money on the transaction by being charitable? On my next visit, I'll bring our specialist in that area so we can talk about it in more detail. Now, notice in this that we're not going to provide an answer or a solution in that initial conversation. We want to actually have that delay before we have that next meeting. It's very powerful because, well, number one, it keeps the initial conversation social. We're not going to be making any kind of financial ask there. It also gives you time to pick up the phone. I've got this donor with this weird asset. What do I do with this? It gives you time to build those creative options or connect with others who can build out some solutions for you. Also, for the donor, this makes those options feel more valuable. It gives the donor time to think about the asset, think about their charitable impact, and that is very powerful. In story terms, this epic scene where you present these asset giving options, it requires a bit of build-up. You are that guiding sage who delivers the perfect weapon to help the hero complete that heroic journey. Expertise can help, but we don't want to give the whole answer in that conversation. We want to get the next meeting. Well, if I had you in a classroom, then I would force you to do in-class work to ask for a meeting, and then we would talk about what happens if, oh my goodness, you get some hyper-technical question, right? The answer is that you use that as a motivation to set up an opportunity for the next meeting. I want to talk to some of our technical experts to put together the best options for you, but I think there are some attractive possibilities here. Having the right destination de-stresses that conversation, knowing that we're not trying to give the right answer in that conversation. We're trying to get the next meeting at which we can present those more detailed answers. Now, what if you think you see an opportunity, but later find there isn't a solution? As long as you get that next meeting, you can still present other powerful options of other appreciated assets that might work better than this particular appreciated asset. And frankly, even if you present these asset giving options at that next meeting and the donor says no, you've still accomplished something very powerful. You've provided value to the donor by giving options that are more powerful than simply giving cash. And also, you've begun to train the donor on that idea of wealth sharing or asset sharing. Because we've got to keep in mind that setting is not just a place, the land of wealth sharing, it's also a time. And the time might not be right for the donor. It may be right a little bit later when an investment or business is about to be sold and they're facing that big capital gains tax, or maybe future estate planning, or a new project at the charity arises. Asking about gifts of assets lays the groundwork for future events. So let's get started. How do we actually have these conversations? What are the scripts that we use? What questions can we ask that lead to these gifts of assets? We know that we want to talk about wealth. We want to talk about wealth because it creates a setting of wealth sharing, not disposable income sharing. It can also uncover capacity for a major gift. It reveals opportunities for creative solutions. And most importantly, it leads to the next meeting that shares these creative options. So you've heard the phrase, there's an app for that. Well, similarly, whatever that donor's asset situation is, there is a plan giving solution for that. I teach 2 semester-long courses on charitable gift planning. And in fact, I have 65 short animated videos of about 12 minutes apiece that are on YouTube. You can see those for free, or if you want them linked, you go to Encourage Generosity. That will link you in directly to those YouTube videos. But the idea is there are so many great strategies. If a donor is planning to sell an appreciated asset, we've got great strategies for that. If they're not planning to sell appreciated stocks, no problem. Maybe they're getting ready to retire, or they're taking retirement account distributions, or they have a big income spike, or they can't use tax deductions, or they have kids who don't want to take over the farm or the vacation home, or they have estate tax issues, or all their wealth is tied up in illiquid assets. All of those have great charitable planning opportunities. And we can get into those whenever we can get to that next meeting at which we can share these creative options. Because once we get agreement for that next meeting, we can then be very straightforward about asking about the details of that asset so that we can then build out some options, talk with some experts, build out those possibilities. So there's a couple of different strategies that we can use here to work with donors to elicit this kind of information. One of the things that we know from research is that people are more forthcoming when you ask questions in a casual way rather than a buttoned up official tone. So we can actually just start really social with this. Could be a question like, how's business, or how's the market been treating you? The magic actually comes from the follow-up questions. These will show shared interests and reveal opportunities to provide advice. What are we ultimately trying to do with our conversations? What we're ultimately trying to do is to elicit from the donor the past, present, and future asset story. You see, assets have stories, and those who are interested in wealth managing and building wealth, they are very personally invested in those asset stories, and very often are interested in sharing those. So there's the past, the origins of the asset. There's the present, what's happening now. And then there's the future plans for the asset. If we can elicit this past, present, and future story about the asset, it leads to great charitable planning opportunities. So, for example, if let's say the asset is a business, the past, what's the story of your business? How did you get started? The present, what are you most excited about at the current time? Any challenges right now? And then we ask for the future question. What are your future plans for the business? Well, the future question, that is the fundraising punchline. Because I've got to tell you, spoiler alert, there's only two answers to the future asset question. They're either going to sell it or they're going to die with it. And both of those are great opportunities for charitable planning. Well, that is the fundraising punchline. Suppose we find out that, well, the plan is for a future sale or transfer. Ask about it. What would that mean to you? Have you thought about using the sale or transition of your business as an opportunity to achieve some of your charitable goals in addition to your financial goals? Or maybe their plan is not to sell it, so they're going to die with it. Ask about that. Will your heirs continue running the business? I know there are some smart ways to avoid taxes for people like you who want to include a gift to charity in their plans. Have you ever considered that? Now we can do this with any kind of an asset, right? Whether maybe are you a collector, hard stamps, coins, etc. What's the story? How did you get started? Do you invest in real estate? How did you get started? Where do you vacation? Do you own a home there? How's the market been treating you? What's your investment philosophy? What's the best investment you ever made? Tell me that story. These are all ways where we can begin having asset conversations with donors, ultimately moving that from the story of the asset in the past to the present to the charitable future, leading to questions like, have you considered making gifts with assets instead of cash? Or many donors giving at your level use appreciated assets instead of cash because they get a double tax benefit. Have you ever considered giving in that way? Or have you ever given something other than cash to a charitable organization? Another way we can approach this is to ask the how question. Now, we're comfortable as fundraisers asking the why questions. Why are they supporting the organization? But now we can also ask the how questions. You've done so much for this organization. What allows you to be so generous? How were you able to make this wonderful gift? To get into those asset conversations. You can also try a reverse question. What is that? That's when you make a statement that's going to trigger a question from the donor. So, for example, somebody meets you and, well, what do you do for the organization? Oh, I help our donors give smarter. That's going to trigger a question. Okay, what do you mean by that? How do you do that? When you get a question, that gives you permission to share a story about a donor that made a gift of an asset. Now, if you really want to trigger a question, you can say, well, I help people give weird assets to our organization. Nobody can resist that. Resist that? What's the weirdest asset someone has given? The point is, if you get asked this question, now you can share a story. In your story, your advice, if you have one of those stories, help someone like the donor. If you don't have one of those donors, that's fine. You can use another donor. It doesn't even have to be a donor to your organization if you don't have any yet. The idea, though, is you're going to share a story of a donor who gives an asset instead of cash, and how that was more powerful, in part because of the double tax benefit, avoiding the capital gains tax, making a big impact. And then we will end that story with a question about their situation. So, for example, if we're sharing a story about an unusual asset gift, we ask them, have you ever made any unusual investments? Or if we're just sharing a typical story about giving an appreciated asset and avoiding capital gains tax, we ask them, have you ever been hit with capital gains tax? Now, the point is, whatever their answer is, we follow up, right? Say, if we ask, have you ever made any unusual investments? If they say yes, ask about it. Oh, did it go up in value? Tell me about that. If they say no, ask about that. So, do you like stocks or bonds or something else? Or if we end the story with, have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? If they say yes, ask about that. Oh, that must mean you were good at investing. Tell me what happened. If they say no, ask about that. Oh, that's smart. It's good to avoid those as long as you can. Do you think it might be a problem in the future? So we've got a bunch of these conversation openers. I'm an experimental researcher, so I not only want to share with you results from experiments, but I want to experiment on you. So I want you to put into the chat, which of these would you feel more comfortable having in saying in a conversation with a donor? And there's no right or wrong answer here. Just curious as to what folks feel more or less comfortable with the different approaches on this. And looks like one is really popular. Yeah, very social. Hey, how's business? What's the story of the business? That is a very easy way to open that conversation. So thanks so much for jumping in with that. At least I have proof of life from 4 of the 15 people that are on the call here today. So, some other things can happen from this. They can also signal that they don't own any appreciated assets. And that's valuable too, because most likely, if they're just holding cash, they probably don't have the capacity necessarily to be a prospect for a major gift. As we look at that, we also had a vote for number 4. You've done so much for the organization. What allows you to be so generous? How are you able to make this wonderful gift? Thanks for jumping in on that one. So we have many paths, but one destination. That destination is the meeting to share options. This reminds me of another donor situation. I remember he used some creative planning that avoided taxes, created income, or provided for family, whatever their particular concern is, and made a big impact at the organization. Would you mind if I talk to some of our experts and put together a few ideas for you to look at? Now, there is a different strategic approach we can take to have these conversations, and that is to make the question part of another task. Now, when I was in practice as an estate planning attorney, I could ask very blunt questions about wealth. If even their best friend had asked them some of these questions, it wouldn't go well. Why did they answer the questions? Because we were there to get a job done. You see, if we have a barrier that we're trying to help the person get over, then we can be very straightforward with the questions. So if we get agreement on a task like, what's holding you back from your reaching your charitable goals, and then they share that. What if it was possible for you to make a gift and still accomplish your financial goals? Would you mind if I shared some of those options with you? Well, now we've got agreement on a task and we can start asking questions about assets. Or, for example, you mentioned that you're going to be passing the business on to your kids or selling your practice. Would you be interested in charitable options that may save you money on your transaction? Or you've been so generous to this cause in the past, would you be interested in learning how to give more at a lower cost by using the best assets for the gift? See, once you get agreement on that next meeting or on the general idea, then you can be blunt, right? Oh, well, they've agreed to the task now. So now we can be straightforward. So tell me more about this asset. What did it cost? What do you think it's worth now? Or how is your business structured? Is it difficult to get profits out due to tax concerns? Do you have any life insurance policies you no longer need? Whatever the scenario is, now we can be blunt with the questions because we've got an agreement on a task. Other ways we can do this, we can use the gift menu in conversation. For example, I help donors like you to give smarter. Now, usually this involves gifts of stocks or real estate, businesses, life insurance, retirement accounts. The tax benefits can be much larger. Have you ever considered other types of gifts like these? What options would you be interested in knowing more about? Now, we don't have to do this in conversation, of course. We can do this in a survey, response card, website. We can check or click to receive information about top tips for giving different assets for saving taxes on the assets, on those asset gifts. Because if somebody checks that box, that lets you know, one, they have this asset, and two, they're thinking about doing something charitable with it. Well, that's somebody we want to be having a conversation with. We can even get in these conversations just by asking for opinions. First, we justify the task. We've noticed that other charities receive more of their gifts from stocks and real estate, and we're trying to figure out why. Then we ask for agreement on the task. Do you mind if I ask a few questions about your thoughts on this? Then we can ask for opinions. You see, when we get into those opinions, Then we're having asset conversations. So, what's the likelihood that you would ever consider making, say, a gift of stocks or bonds, a gift of real estate, a gift in a will, gift of cryptocurrency, artwork, or oil rights? Well, now we are having those asset conversations. We can also talk about more detailed things like what have you heard about the extra tax benefits from donating assets instead of cash, or the extra tax benefits from leaving estate gifts from an IRA or 401k. Again, we are asking for opinions. Now, all of these are about lead ups that ultimately lead to the ask, but you can actually change the setting after the gift decision. Chirin Koshi shares this story. He said, I had a donor on the phone. He said, I'm going to send you a check for $2,000. I said, Jim, is there any chance that you have stock that is worth $2,000? He said, yes, absolutely, but I don't want to sell that stock. I said, take the cash, go buy that exact same stock, and send us the old shares worth $2,000. Now you have stepped up basis. That highly appreciated stock now starts at zero for capital gains tax purposes. And you get a charitable deduction as well. He asked, I can do that? I said, yeah. The next day, we received a stock gift, not of $2,000, but of $10,000 from the donor. Why? He had not asked for a gift of a different size. He asked for a gift from a different asset. And once a donor is engaged in wealth sharing, oh, now what's my reference point? It's my stock portfolio. So now that $10,000 gift seems a lot more reasonable than it did when I was going to be writing a check out of my checking account. It's very powerful. We can change that setting in other ways. We can change the setting after pledge payments start. After the first payment on a pledge, you could say, I noticed you made your last pledge gift with cash. Many of our donors like to make gifts of assets instead of cash because they get a double tax benefit. Have you ever considered doing that? Now, again, this is something where we say, oh, but they're just fulfilling the pledge. We're not raising more money. No, you're making a dramatic transformation with the donor because they are now engaged in asset sharing. And that's very powerful to predict long-term giving. Now, we don't have to wait until after they're already making pledge payments. We can do that right after the pledge decision. I can't thank you enough for this tremendous commitment to our charity. When I come back to finalize the details of how you want to allocate the gift, I'll bring a colleague who specializes in putting together gifts to maximize the tax benefits for you. We can even change the setting after the estate gift decision. If you plan to leave something to charity in your estate plan, could I share with you a way to make sure that the best assets are used for the gift to minimize the loss in taxes? Now, there is a difference between understanding the concepts and actually doing it. The execution can be scary because we're used to just hitting the easy button of asking for cash. It kind of feels like we're saying, no, I don't want your cash. But that can feel scary. But this is what we need to do in a sense. It means becoming the donor's helper in the conversation. You see, in this case, we don't stop at the cash gift. We start having the asset conversations. Why? To help the donor. It's actually a much more inexpensive way for the donor to give. We take on more administrative hassle to help the donor. Now, when it comes to administrative hassle, truth of the matter is we can just ship this through a donor advised fund, so it comes out as cash to us in the end. But the important part is that the donor is sharing those assets. You are there to provide that guidance, wisdom, and counsel as the donor's guiding sage. And that's a really powerful relationship role to be in as we're having these conversations. Hey, as I mentioned, I do share all my stuff for free, books, slides, videos, whether it's on plan giving stuff or conversational stuff. This is actually from a book called The Socratic Fundraiser. There's even links to the audiobook version of it if you prefer that as well. So I hope some of this has been of interest to you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share there because we did want to leave some time for folks to jump in, not only with questions, comments, thoughts, hey, snide remarks if you've got one, that's fine, but also if there's anything else having to do with fundraising. I do research on this area all the time, lots of different topics I talk about. So if you want to hear about some other topic as well, what's going on with that, just let me know on that. So I'll just go ahead and open it up for thoughts, comments, questions at this point. Okay, so first question here, just a second. So, Becky, for those of us who don't have as much of a background on wealth and asset management, are there any good references you can recommend? If we don't have a wealth expert on staff, if you know what I mean, absolutely, right? This is one of the reasons, by the way, why the goal is to get the next meeting. If we get the next meeting, we've got agreement on a task. So give me the details on this asset, right? So because I'm going to be working with some of our experts and I want to make sure I have all of the details, right? We get all that down, and now we can either A, contact somebody, whether it's a consultant or somebody else in the space, to try to get some ideas, or B, you can dive into this yourself. Now, Becky, that comes back to your question. Are there any good references you can recommend? Yes, I've got some genius references for you. If you go to Encourage Generosity, there is a book called Visual Planned Giving. That's the book that I use to teach through 2 semester-long courses on the law and tax aspects of charitable gift planning. However, you can also get that same material that is in the form of kind of short animated videos, also linked there. Now, I put that in about 12-minute segments because the idea being that, look, I get it, you don't like tax law, but if you just suffer through like 12 minutes of this a day, give it to a couple of months, and you'll be familiar with the whole planet of all the options that we give. Or if you just want to listen to it as an audiobook, you can do it that way as well. So definitely do recommend that. I know the author personally, and this is actually the same textbook that is used if you get your CAP designation, other things like that. They use my material as well. So I do recommend that. Denise, I see the hand raised.
Sure.
You unmute yourself, please.
Lower my hand there. Um,
Yes.
I'm a one-person shop,
Yes.
and so the whole thought of the giving the stocks instead of the $2,000, one of my first thoughts was, oh, do I then cash out those stocks for the 10,000 pretty
Yeah.
quickly, like do a turnaround on that? Because I don't know
Yes.
that we would want to be then holding stocks and
No.
watching the market and everything.
Right, right. So yeah, so typically there are some exceptions to that. And the only exceptions would be there are some assets. So the one exception I would say is life insurance. You need to talk to an expert first before you just cash it out, because oftentimes there's actually much more value in not cashing it out. So at least check before you cash that one out. But yeah, the standard procedure from every major charity is once they get the asset, it turns it into cash. And by the way, if you ever have someone who wants to give you something valuable, and maybe your CFO or says we're not going to take that asset, not a problem. You just tell the donor, absolutely, we'd love that gift. We just need to run that through a donor advised fund. Let me walk you through that process, because folks, there are donor advised funds that exist just to deal with weird assets, right? So I'm talking about like unharvested crops, a partial interest in a racehorse, or in one case, an elephant ride business in India that had to be held for 3 years before it was sold. Okay, there's a donor
Mhm.
advised fund for that sort of thing. And so, you can start with your local community foundation first, but Charitable Solutions with Brian Klontz has a donor advised fund that does a lot of these kinds of weird assets. But there is a solution as long as what they're trying to give you is a valuable asset. So please don't talk to me about your timeshares here. You know what I mean when I say valuable asset. But the point is, the answer is never no. It may just be, yes, we would love that. We just need to run that through a donor advised fund. Let me show you how to do that.
Got
Anything
it.
else
Thank
on
you.
that, Denise?
No,
Good.
I'm sorry. I'm just laughing too because I wish I would have known. Someone tried to give us a house years ago and it ended up not being processed, but too bad
Yeah.
we didn't think of the DAF at the time.
Yeah, and just as an example, a Realty Gift Fund, they're a DAF that only does real estate. And to tell you the truth, I've had fundraisers from like really large universities that don't even basically don't tell their boss. if they have a donor who has like a piece of real estate, they will just walk them through how to use a DAF, because if the university gets it, they've ended up having really unhappy donors because the university gets it and they have somebody set up to, okay, there's a person who's interested in buying it, if it's some complicated asset, whatever. And, the university is like 12 layers of administration to say yes. And again, they start dragging their feet, and then the sale collapses, and then the donor's hacked off. And then, so, I've had people that are working at, really major universities that say, I just don't even do that anymore. I just tell the donor, let's run that through a donor advised fund, because those people do deals every day, and so they're ready to make things close. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, and Adrian, you had a hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. This has been hugely informative.
Thanks.
It's one of these things that I feel like, again, like someone else said, it's like out of my wheelhouse. Like we don't
Mhm.
have a major gifts
Mhm.
officer. Like I just do all the development. It's
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
one of just a few people.
right.
And we have a few folks who do give, large for us gifts that probably
Mhm.
have, we know they have much higher capacity. I've seen where they
Mhm.
live. Um,
Mhm.
I know the size of their own homes. They definitely have more out there. So this is just a great change of just mindset of how to speak to some people. Um, and my first thought is also like, it's probably not me to have that conversation. It's probably one of my board members,
Mhm. Mhm.
someone else out there.
Well,
So
and let me jump in and say that if these things are too daunting for you at this point, you know what you can do? You can share stories. You know how to share donor stories. Just start sharing asset donor stories. That is, stories about making a gift of shares of stock. Or if you have donors, and maybe they put that into their DAF first before it comes to you. Ask the donor, hey, or even at a board meeting, we need to share some stories about asset gifts to encourage people to, think about these asset gifts. Do any of you make asset gifts either through your DAF or directly to us that you would be willing to share a story? So again, that's something that we can do just in our regular donor communications, but shifting those stories from cash donor stories to asset donor stories, it's really powerful. It starts to set that social norm that, oh, people like us make gifts like this. And so there are some things you can do, even if the individual conversation is still a little bit daunting. Sorry, I interrupted you there,
yeah, no,
Adrian,
no,
but just
that's great. I mean, it was just before I even got to my question, it just occurred to me that yeah, this is probably, maybe I might take this presentation and start trying to, somehow present it like, to our board in an abbreviated, concept of just I don't think we've ever asked for anything other than cash,
right.
and when you only ask for cash, you only get what's coming out of somebody's pocket. And, we've been having talks about, how to specifically ask for DAF funds because the money is already out of their pockets, right?
Hmm.
So it's no
Hmm.
longer taking money off the dinner table.
Hmm.
Um, not that people are cutting corners that close, but, it's already out there. So if you're going to spend it somewhere, you might as well spend it with us.
Yeah,
But so
well, and let me throw out, because you mentioned the idea of talking with board members about like an abbreviated version of this. So I do have a slide deck that is donor facing, and it's just called How to Give Smarter. And so it walks through some of the most basic approaches, which very quickly leads into asset giving. And again, if you go to encouragegenerosity.com, there's just a button that says all slide decks, and then you can just go down to the one that's how to give smarter. And you can get it that way. Also, I put all the slide decks there as PDFs, but if you want the PowerPoint version, just let me know. I'll ship those to you. But that's an example of how you might, because that is very sort of straightforward, it might be something that you would get to a point of feeling like, well, yeah, I could share this with, with some of the donors on that, or at least some parts of the slide deck. Sorry,
yeah,
Adrian, I
you
keep
check that
interrupting
out.
you, but
So my actual question.
yes, I finally
So
let you
you
get to that.
I loved your example of saying someone wanted to give you $2,000 in cash, and you said, no, don't give me that. Go buy more stock at the higher price point,
Give us
and
yield shares.
give, dump your stock and just do a like for like purchase. I
Mhm.
think that's such a out of the box thought. I know just like for our own personal investments, what an interesting way to raise or to, to change that that baseline of,
Mhm.
you still have the same, 40,000 shares of something, but
Mhm.
you know,
Exactly.
you raise that base. And so when you do sell it in the future, um, just it decreases that taxability of it.
Exactly.
So is there a recommended kind of like starting point? Like sometimes we don't have that in advance, right? The $1,000 check just shows up.
Mhm.
Um, do you suggest that, anyone, if you happen to like get wind of like, hey, I'm going to do this, do you jump right in with that? Would you recommend like reaching out to like a targeted group of donors? Like, do I just say, hey, anyone who gave, over $1,000 for annual appeal, come this fall, say, hey, you gave $1,000 last year or $2,000 last year.
Mhm.
Do we take that is it, it's a little bit awkward almost to say, do I reach out to them and say, would you consider doing stock instead this year? And so then explain this tax
Right.
advantageous giving process, kind of how would that look to you?
Yeah, so a couple of different approaches. Obviously, in communications, we can put it in a newsletter. Here's a great way to give smarter. The other approach, if you're doing a one-on-one approach, in the process of, saying, "Hey, Adrian, I just wanted to thank you for the gift that you made last year. You gave us over $2,000 last year for the cause." I wanted to mention something there. A lot of donors giving at your level like to give appreciated assets like stocks instead of cash because they get a double tax benefit by giving that way. Is that something you might ever consider? So again, we're just opening it up in that case in the context of an expression of gratitude, and just pointing out that people like them make gifts like this. And then if the response is, "Oh, I don't understand. How does that work?" Then we could explain it. Or if the response is, "Well, yeah, I mean, I've got some shares of stock, but the market's being weird right now. I don't really want to sell those shares of Apple." And that's when you say, "Oh, you don't have to change your portfolio at all. Instead of sending us the cash, you use the cash to buy new shares of Apple stock, and you donate the old shares of Apple stock." To us or to your donor advised fund, and then to us if they're doing it that way. So those are ways to just kind of get in the conversation because what are you doing? You're just sharing donor stories, right? That other people giving at your level, like to do this.
Amazing. Thank you. Really, that's some great insights. Appreciate it.
Great, great. Happy to share.
With that, we're at time. If there's additional questions, would you mind if I shared your contact information?
Oh yeah, yeah, please do. No, I'm happy to help anytime. I'm on LinkedIn. That's an easy way to connect. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I actually send you a ridiculously long reply that has links to everything that I've ever done. So you can do it that way. And or if you just type in Russell James Texas Tech, should get my email, russell.james@ttu.edu, here at Texas Tech University.
Thank you so much for joining us today and also providing ways that we connect and sharing all those resources. Really
Great.
appreciate that.
Yeah, happy to help.
With that, everybody, see you next month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.